All right. I'm Christopher Kuntz. I have the real pleasure of interviewing Linda Tatum. I know of you from your great career, but I also know of you for our many years working together in the city of Long Beach, where you held planning positions and community development and ultimately assistant city manager. And we're going to talk about many highlights of your career and your accomplishments, but I want to go back a little bit. So can you say hello and then tell us a little bit about where were you born? What do you remember about that first community that you lived in?
Okay, I am happy to be here today, and I'm really fortunate that you're here to have this conversation with me. I'll go back to my humble beginnings in the state of Florida, where I grew up in a rural, unincorporated area of the state. I was I was from a large family. I came from a family of 10. I happened to be the first in my family to graduate from college, and early on in my career, I had no idea about planning, didn't know what it was, and didn't ever aspire to be a planner. But as circumstances would have it, that's where I ended up, and I'd be happy to share kind of how I got into that. But I ended up going and getting my graduate degree in planning after having worked in planning for a little bit, and it was amazing because even though I always knew I wanted to get a college degree and I knew I wanted to have a graduate degree, I had no clue about what my career path would be. So when I stumbled upon the path of planning, I knew that this was what I wanted to do, and I didn't discover it until after I had graduated from college. I graduated from college I worked in a social service agency for the county, but I hadn't yet discovered planning. I didn't know what it was all about, and when I did discover it, I knew immediately that it was the career path that was meant for me.
And how did you discover it? What was that eureka moment that brought you to the profession?
The eureka moment for me was as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a rural area, and they were getting bus service extended to that area for the first time. And as a very involved and engaged citizen in that community, I went down to the county to share my thoughts about where the bus route should go. And I was talking to the transportation planner, and after about a 5-minute conversation, she asked me, Linda, do you happen to have a degree? And I said, yes, I graduated from Florida State. My degree is in government and sociology. She said, well, we're looking for a planner. And my response was, what's a planner? And she described to me what planning was and what planners did, and I thought, that sounds interesting. And within 2 weeks, I started working as an assistant planner for the county that I happened to live in. I had no experience, knowledge of planning, even though I had my degree in the same college as the graduate planning program. I had no knowledge of planning. That was how I discovered it. They hired me. I started doing local planning work, and the really challenging part for me as in my early career was administering a community development block grant. While I loved the planning part of it, administering that grant was extremely challenging. It was a federal grant that the county had received. The county was already 3 years behind in producing the results of that grant for a couple of projects, and I walked in the door under an audit because the county had not performed, and I was expected to turn over the projects immediately, so it was very challenging. But that was my introduction to planning. But I knew, in spite of the challenges, that it was what I was born to do. So probably within 6 months, I decided to go back to graduate school and get my degree in planning. And that was how I was introduced to planning, and I did that.
I love that story. And then what first brought you out to California?
I will tell you, it's my first year of graduate school. The National APA Conference was in San Francisco. It was amazing to me because I had never been to California. I had never been to a city as large as San Francisco. I was completely enamored in a very positive way, overwhelmed with being in the midst of, at that time, 3,000 planners from all over the country. I was in my first year of graduate school, and I fell in love with the city. And immediately I said, when I get my degree, I want to work in this state. It was this environment of intense just learning, and I was just like a sponge soaking it all in and meeting planners from all over the country, and all of these sessions about the real world of planning, so far removed from my small county in Florida. So it just excited me in every way, and I finished my degree, and immediately, I want to say within a week of graduating, I moved to California.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
And then over your time here, you've worked in different cities. I know you from your time in Inglewood and Long Beach, but before that there was Santa Ana and other places. But you also did private work, working for consulting firms, preparing general plans and other planning documents. So across all of that, what would you say are kind of some of your favorite projects or most memorable projects that you felt that made a difference?
Yeah, I did work in 4 different communities, as you mentioned, and also a stint as a consultant. And I will say that I really, really enjoyed working on both sides of the aisle. I know that I so enjoyed working as a public sector consultant, as a public sector planner, but when the opportunity arose to go be a consultant, I relished the idea of seeing what planning was like from the other side. And I'm really glad that I did, because even though the skill sets are obviously similar, because the planning work, the technical work is the same, I learned a completely different skill set being a consultant. I learned how to market myself, the company. I learned that I needed to broaden my skill set. I learned business development. I learned the cost of doing planning from the perspective of how much it costs in labor, materials, other resources, and I learned all that it takes to put together a good plan, meaning it's not just the work of a planner, it's the work of an economist. When you're doing really broad, long-range planning, you need an economist. You want to look at the financials of planning proposals. You need a transportation engineer to look at the cost proposal. So I learned so much from working as a private consultant. I learned the cost of planning, and I learned how to put together cost proposals that were competitive. I learned and got to know a lot of different specializations within the area of planning in order to be effective as a consultant. And the other really good thing about it is I got to work in many different communities. So I learned how communities and the challenge of planning in different communities is so different. They're like fingerprints. They all have a unique perspective, and as a consultant, you have to be sensitive to how to not only prepare a project, but be aware of what it'll take to get your project through the political process in that community. Because a part of your job is to not just develop a plan, but to develop a plan that the community and the policymakers can buy into. So that was a really critical part of my learning experience from the other perspective. And obviously you do that as a public sector planner as well, but I learned it just from a different perspective, so that was extremely helpful.
That's great. And then across that time, do you have some favorites in terms of
Yes.
projects and programs?
Yes, I have a few. I want to say the one that probably comes to mind most immediately is my work in the city of Inglewood. And the reason it was so impactful, or it still resonates with me as a part of my experience, is that as a consultant, I had the good fortune of preparing all of the entitlements for a major development or a major specific plan. It was called a Hollywood Park specific plan. It was a specific plan that covered a 320 acre parcel that used to be the Hollywood Park racetrack. In a developed urban environment like Los Angeles County, that was just such a unique and rare opportunity. As a consultant, I had the responsibility of leading the entire entitlement process for the general plan amendment, the specific plan, the zone change, all of the entitlements that it took to entitle that project, which probably took 2 years to complete. I went through that entitlement process. The recession hit. No development happened during that early time. That was during the 80s. So in the interim, working as a consultant, the firm I was working with, they had started to lay off people, and I started to get nervous, and I thought, well, let me start looking in the public sector. 6 years later, I went to work for the city of Inglewood as the community development director, and I don't know that this ever happens, but I was responsible for implementing the specific plan that I had entitled as a consultant. And it's such a monumental project with the 320 acres, 3,000 residential units, acres of park land, over 500,000 square feet of retail. A very important project, and probably 2 years after the project started, the implementation process, the owner of an NFL team came to town, purchased the property adjacent to the Hollywood Park specific plan, and proposed the SoFi Stadium, which is probably still to this day in the nation the newest and the most state-of-the-art stadium in the country. So that was a very impactful project for me.
And I know there's the words on the page, but it must have really helped you having all that kind of history and background once you came to the city and understanding how that plan sort of came to be.
Absolutely. That history, because the other really important project that I worked on for the city was the rehabilitation of the Forum. The Forum was a historic, it was the home of the Lakers, a professional NBA team, and they had left the city of Inglewood, and the Forum sat there vacant for many years. The Lakers moved to downtown Los Angeles. So as the community development director, my job was working on the development agreement with the city for Madison Square Gardens, who had an East Coast presence that we're all very familiar with, but they wanted to expand their presence to the West Coast, and their real bread and butter is really entertainment venues. So they wanted a presence on the West Coast, so they came in and purchased the Forum, and the city did a development agreement with them to do the city put $50 million into it. Madison Square Gardens added another $50 million to the project to do a complete upgrade of the Forum for their purchase. So that was another really exciting project, and my history with the city through the Hollywood Park project really contributed to that. So that was another major success. And if you got time for one.
That's not just a success, but it's one of the premier kind of places to go see a concert today here in Southern California. So
it is.
Concert goers throughout the region have you to thank for bringing that facility back to life and giving it a new mission.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's really exciting now because today I am starting to see, as we all are if you live in Southern California, seeing the Hollywood Park specific plan actually be developed. The stadium is now, the SoFi Stadium is now complete, and they've actually added to it now with another, the Intuit Arena, which is just across the street. I didn't happen to work on that, but that was actually the concept of marketing that property for development was in the works before I left the city. So it's super exciting. But I will tell you, I'll add one more project that I'd like to talk about that I'm really pleased about. And it was what made me leave the city of Inglewood to go to the city of Long Beach, which is where I worked for 8 years and retired from. The city was developing a P3 project, public-private partnership, to completely redevelop its civic center. They were building a new city hall, a new administration building for the Port of Long Beach, and a major private a housing piece as a component of that, and a brand new library. It completely reconfigured the city's downtown civic center, which is the heart of the city, a core, and the city had gone through a very extensive process to develop plans for that. That plan was already in place when I came there, so I was fortunate enough to be on the end of actually the entitlement of it. So the plans were done, but it had not yet been entitled. So I started, and that fundamentally lured me to the city of Long Beach. I had never done a public-private partnership, and there were just so many. The city was known for its progressive approach to planning, and most importantly to me, they fully supported planning. The city had a history of doing good, progressive, forward-thinking planning. They had a council that supported planning and a fairly engaged citizenry. So I really wanted the opportunity to work in a community like that. And that P3 project to redevelop the Civic Center, it was a couple of $billion project overall, and it was one of the most fascinating projects and rewarding projects I've worked on, because I got to be there to see it come to fruition and got to move in and work from that brand new city hall, and it was just a major experience.
Yeah, Long Beach is a special place. We got the chance to work there together, and I continue to work there. So, I think we're both thankful for that great workplace, but I also try to think about sometimes, part of that project is an amazing library, kind of not just a library, it's the main library, and that's kind of one view of how people interact with the city, but also an amazing civic plaza and council chambers. So I wonder, over the course of your career, kind of how you think about these like civic buildings and the message it kind of sends to folks that live in a city about kind of where the city is and where it's going.
Well, I think it's very important. It's subtle, and you don't think about it very much, but I would like to acknowledge that I think that's the good thing about the team that the city pulled together to design that new civic center, because the thought of making that project a heart of the city, a beacon for not just the people who needed to come there to do business, but the residents. The idea was that it would completely change the character of the prior city hall, which was not very open and not very accessible to the public. It turned its back to the city, to the main corridor, essentially. So in the design of that new city hall, it was purposely designed to be open, to have many areas of access, both pedestrian and visual access, and to really link the civic center with the rest of the downtown. And I think the designers of that project were very thoughtful in how they did it, from a pedestrian orientation, a visual orientation, and I'd say even from the materials that were used, and some of the very nice touches of how they designed the Civic Plaza to have a continuous linkage from the downtown transit center, where you come into the city of Long Beach on the A line from downtown Los Angeles. You get off the train and you can literally have a visual access to the Civic Center and pedestrian access to the downtown. So I think that was they were very thoughtful in how that design, including the council chambers, which is where residents come to have their voices heard. And that city is very thoughtful. They still have, you actually come to the meetings, you don't get to just do it on video. So it made the council chambers, which is the people's place, very accessible to the public. And they designed a civic plaza, which is not just for the city's use, but for the public use, where they have public events, civic events. It's a community space. And the upgrade of the park, the Lincoln Park, which was an integral part of the Civic Center. There's this really seamless connection between the park and the Civic Center. So it was it's a very fundamental part of the heart of the city for residents, visitors, and the people who need to come there to do business.
Yeah, I think it's a huge success. I mean, for some folks, it communicates a lot through the architecture and landscape architecture. For others, it's just a beautiful park to come play with their kids, or a fantastic library with
Yes.
amazing natural light. So it operates in many different ways.
Award-winning library, yes.
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 So over the course of these projects in your career, you've seen the profession around you change as well. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how the profession has changed over time, and some of your thoughts about that.
I think the profession has changed, I would say, in a couple of ways, but the one that really comes to mind most often, I think planning has always been about building great communities, and that's kind of the catchphrase for APA as a professional organization, building great communities. But I think the profession has become a lot more mindful of engaging the community, meaning the people that we are doing the planning for. And I'm not suggesting that in the past there wasn't a thought about the community, but I think there's been an increased and positive emphasis on making sure that the voices of the folks in the community that we plan for are being heard, and not just paying lip service to it, but in everything from how you are engaging them, the means that you're engaging them, the extent to which you're going above and beyond to make sure that there's participation. It's from everything from where you have the meetings, to what time you have the meetings, to what languages you have the meetings. So that's the one extremely positive change that I've seen in the profession. A significantly greater emphasis on engaging the community in the planning process. And I would also say being aware of the diversity of the communities that we plan for, because in my career, I think I've always had the good fortune of working in communities that were fairly diverse, but it's really challenging to truly know and understand the extent of that diversity and what the needs are for those different components of your community. So if a community or a city is very thoughtful, they pay attention to that and make an extra effort to make sure that they're engaging those. So that's a really positive change I've seen. And I think the profession itself, including our professional organization, is mindful that in the past we have not been a diverse organization. And I've seen our organization, and I'm going to say our profession, acknowledge that and take some really positive steps to addressing that and making sure that as a profession we are representing that diversity that we represent in the plans that in our practice. So those are a couple of really positive changing. It's community engagement, and it's also just acknowledging and respecting and speaking very specifically to efforts to include that diversity in the practice from different perspectives, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's key to what it is to be a planner. It's not always easy or even pleasant, right? I think you and I have been in meetings where people are screaming at us or saying some unrepeatable things, or but you have always been just the consummate professional. Can you talk about how you've just kind of navigated that and how you've been able to stay focused on the goal?
Yeah, I really like that question, and I will say that a part of it has just been my personality. I think I tend to be calm, but I think that I've always had this feeling that I don't just represent myself, I represent my profession, and it boils down to credibility. I think as planning professionals, we have to be credible, and I don't think you can be as credible and effective or productive if you can't take the heat, I'm going to say, of some of those heatings. So, and I think I've just been very mindful of that, and I think the way I've dealt with a lot of those challenges when it's been difficult, because you are so right, I can remember being in meetings where I've felt the heat
Yeah.
and the tension, and it very extreme. We've had some really extreme public meetings, and I've just dealt with it by just kind of keeping the focus on what our objective was as a team or as a staff. We represented the city, and our goal was to be as informative as we could. And I don't just mean providing information as much as education. To me, when I say inform, it's informing and educating the public, because the one challenging thing about planning is that if you're not a trained professional, you don't understand all of how we go about the process, the fact that there are state laws that we have to comply with, there's a local ordinances. We don't get to just make it up as we go along.
There's no magic wand, right?
There's no magic wand, and there's not always a playbook.
Yeah.
So being mindful of that, we have to constantly be aware that we're speaking to an audience that may not be aware of all of the prescriptions that we have to deal with, and the challenges that we have to, the prescriptions that we have to work within, the constraints, state law, the zoning code, the general plan. And so it's really all about educating them. And I think I've always liked being a voice of not just reason, but just someone to help be of service. So I think that's helped me deal with some of those challenging, some of those really, really challenging times, and realizing, always keeping your eye on the goal is to get them to understand, and ultimately, whether they agree or not agree, to at least understand and know what our role is and what we're trying to accomplish. So that's helped me a lot.
Yeah, and I think it can feel like battle scars in the moment, but we also have those memories, and you have those rough experiences, and then you can think about, and we got through that and come up with something great for the community in the end.
Right.
So we've talked about some changes. What would you say to planners that are maybe early in their career about how they adapt to change and can prepare for kind of changes in society and kind of adapt through their job and through their profession?
I love that. I think that there are a few things that I think there would be tips or thoughts I would share with someone who's just coming into the profession. The first is probably just to realize that, like any profession, it's a changing profession, and you need to be committed to continuous learning, because it's not static. Even when you have your degree in planning, communities change, policies change, there's always new concepts, new planning techniques, that you have to be committed to staying abreast of change, or you will not be effective. I mean, you can still have a job and probably still plan, but you won't be effective. So I would say be open and willing to continuous learning and learning the community that you work in, as well as being up to speed on new planning practice. I would also say what has benefited me most and has been extremely critical to what I would like to say is the success of my career has been engaged in the professional organizations associated with planning. I started out very early in my, I'll call it service, because that's fundamentally what it is. Service to APA. In my first job as a planner, I think I became engaged. My colleague said, "Hey, why don't you come and volunteer to be on the state planning commission, the conference committee?" And I said, "Sure." And I want to say I got roped in, but that was over 40 years ago, and I think literally ever since then I've been engaged in providing service to APA, either at the section level, being on the section board, being on the national board. I've been on the board of, I'm currently on the board of PAB, but Planning Accreditation Board, but I've been on the National Foundation Board. And for me, it was always about giving back. So my tip to younger planners is to suggest that they get involved and look for ways that they can use the profession to help them grow and learn and network and become more effective, because the more that you network, I feel like the more you network, the more you learn. There are so many opportunities, and it's just a really good way to continue to advance your career, to learn, and to give back. So and the last tip I'd say, other than networking and just continually learning, I'd say is just be willing to always think about not burning yourself out and not focusing so much on your career that you forget about the other parts of your life, your home life, taking care of yourself. And we threw out the term work-life balance, but I can't stress how important that is, to never let your work life overtake your commitment to your family, and more importantly to yourself. Yeah. Taking the time that you need to just stay your well-being. I'll just say that. So that would probably be my last tip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. But you've done a lot of that service that you spoke of, whether it's on APA, on Planning Accreditation Board, you're on the Planning Roundtable, you've raised a lot of money for scholarship for students in school. So kind of spanning all of that service, is there one thing that is especially memorable or that you're especially proud of in terms of your leadership and your service to the professional organization?
I think I wouldn't say one thing in particular, but a couple. Probably the fact that after my long career in planning, I was able to become an AICP fellow. That was the process of becoming a fellow and being selected as a fellow was a very arduous process. So I'm really proud that I took the time, and I didn't do it. I was kind of pushed by another colleague who said, Linda, you really should do it. You've done a lot of work. You've provided a lot of service to the organization. You should do it. But it takes a lot of work to actually go through that process and be successful. And I finally got to the point where I was willing to do that. So I'm really proud that I am an AICP fellow. And I think probably the other proudest moment is the success of the California Planning Foundation and how much they've grown and contributed to student scholarships over the past, since I've been involved, probably over the past 30 years. I just happened to attend the most recent scholarship lunch, which was at the conference today, and they have given out over $1 million in scholarships, and since over the, I'm going to say, 35 years of the CPF. And I'm really proud to say that I had a part in that, because as president of the foundation for over 10 years. So that was one of the big successes, I feel like, of my career.
That's really great. And when you're exposed to those college students or young folks, what do you say to them? This is a great profession, but it's, I don't know, maybe not exactly what you thought it was when you were in college or bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. What do you tell them in terms of survival strategies and how to not just survive but to thrive?
I think one of the things when I'm talking to students or anyone just entering the field, I just encourage them to explore, meaning wherever they happen to be working. I like to encourage them to, because of my experience of working on both sides, both the public sector and the private sector, I like to encourage them to explore working as a public sector planner and as a private sector, because I think you get a different skill set and you get different perspectives. And I think as a planner, while you can be incredibly effective as a private sector planner, I just think knowing and understanding the working of government just is instrumental. It's so invaluable, even as a public sector. I mean, I've seen some very successful planners from the consultant side that didn't really fundamentally understand how government worked and had plans that, while they look good on paper, trying to implement it would never work if you don't understand the process of project approval and the like. So that's one of the things when I talk to young planners, I suggest to them that that's that would be of benefit to them. And the other thing I suggest them is that if they're really early in their career, to take the time to explore. If they aren't sure about where they want to focus on, whether it's transportation or urban design or whatever, to take the time to explore and to dabble in different areas or specializations, and to work in different environments to kind of figure it out if they're not absolutely clear. Sometimes they may not be like I was. Once I got my degree, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, but sometimes you don't know.
Yeah.
And to just be open to new experiences. And I always encourage them to be active in APA, to attend the events and to do the networking because of the opportunities that the organization provides to planners.
Well, before we run out of time, I'm going to ask you a bonus question. So,
Okay.
You've helped me, you've taught me a lot. I've kind of followed in your footsteps in terms of some of my career. Who helped you, or who inspired you throughout your career to help you have all the success that you had over the years?
I would say a couple of folks. Probably the most instrumental was two people. My very first boss, he was the community development director, because I started with no planning, no educational background, and no experience, and not even, as I described earlier, not even knowing what planning was. But he always had faith in me. He challenged me. He always gave me projects that would kind of stretch what I thought my skills and abilities were. And I would also say the chair of my planning program in graduate school, and this is just, I think it was I'm going to call it a blessing. I applied for my graduate program 1 month before classes started. I had not taken the GRE, but based upon my 1 year of planning experience, the chair of my department said, I'm going to give you a provisional admission. If you survive the first quarter, you're good. And he was always there to support me. And like my first supervisor, he believed in me, and he was always there to support me. And he gave me a lot of, he exposed me to planning. He helped me, but he gave me assignments in the program. He said, "Hey, we need your help on the panel, the committee to select the new students." So he respected my background, and he made me feel like I could do it. So those are two very memorable folks that I still feel like I owe a debt of gratitude to.
That's lovely. We talked about a lot. Is there anything we missed that you wanted to share with folks?
I think probably the only thing is that I feel like planning, I think I was born to be a planner. I didn't know it when I was born. That whole mystery, all through my first undergraduate degree, I had no clue about what I wanted to do, and I think it's planning. And I think since I became a planner, I've loved it. I loved the practice, and I love now what I like is giving back. And I feel like I will do that until I can't do it anymore. So I find it deeply, deeply rewarding, the service part of being a planner.
Well, I've really enjoyed this time, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you for having this conversation with me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.